Good morning. You all came today expecting me to preach a Christmas sermon, right? Because it's one of those times of the year that you come to church and you just know what the pastor's going to talk about, right? Because it is what it is. It's Christmas season, and it's an important season for us. It's an important season for us just as people. The idea of Christmas and a time to be together with family and friends and the celebrations that go on. And for those of us in this room who are believers in Jesus, it's even a more special time. Because it takes us back to the very beginning, back to the very start of our hope and of the message that resonates with us. And one of the things that sometimes happens on Christmas is we pastor types try to figure out some kind of new way, something new from this story. Maybe it's something everybody's missed. And the reality is, you've heard this story enough. I could probably simply get up here today and read the story to you, and you could fill in the blanks, and we would all be happy because, again, it's that wonderful Christmas story. But let me tell you what I love about the Christmas story. It is a true-to-life snapshot of your life and of my life. I mean, think about the story for a moment. There are so many parts of it that just do not make any sense. There are so many parts of it that leave us asking why. Why did God do this? Why did that? Why didn't he do this or that as we go through the story? But in my mind, it's the perfect thing that encapsulates this picture that Pastor Ann said as she prayed for these two little boys this morning, of Justin and Zachary, is this idea that God has a purpose for their life. And the Christmas story is a reminder that there is purpose in life even when it doesn't seem like there's purpose to life. Because the reality is, we all want life to make sense, right? We all want it to make sense. In fact, a lot of us spend a lot of our time trying to sort it through. Why did this happen? Why did it happen? What did I do wrong? What did I do right? How's this all going to work? How's this all going to fit together? And the Christmas story is this great picture of all these pieces that somehow try to get fit together. And we have the benefit of looking back now 2,000 years and say, oh, yeah. That's why God did that. That's why God did that. That's why this happened. But if we were in the midst of that, and so a lot of us here today are in the midst of that of why God question. If we were in the midst of that, we would have the sense of where we find the people in the story today. And in fact, we as people have come up with sort of statements, sayings, that we have used to just make us feel better about the sense of life. For example, everything happens for a reason. Isn't that right? Everything happens for a reason? Now, the cynical side of me says, really? Everything? Everything happens for a reason? I mean, this little baby crying right now is happening for a reason? Because if it was happening for a reason, it wouldn't be the reason I would pick, right? But any of these statements we're going to look at, any of them, if we look at them too close, they sort of begin to crumble. But we don't want to look at them too close. We'd rather just be able to say, everything happens for a reason, so I'll hang my hat on that, and I can get through this day because I may not know what the reason is, I may not understand it, but it's got to have a purpose behind it. Another one is this. You just haven't met the right person yet. What does yet mean? Someday. Well, when is that someday? Let's not get too good. Let's just find the idea. You just haven't met the right person yet, which means someday you'll meet the right person, and everything will work out. Everything will fall just right in place, right? And again, if we look at it too close, it's like, really? I haven't met the right person yet? It just wasn't meant to be. Which is a great one, right? Doesn't work out for Dave. It just wasn't meant to be, Dave. Wasn't your fault, wasn't her fault, wasn't their fault. It just wasn't meant to be. In fact, there's this big meant to be out there someplace who kind of connects these things at some point in life, right? You know, and we're just waiting for that person or that thing out there to connect this meant to be and that meant to be, and then it was meant to be because it happened. But if it doesn't happen, we just say it just wasn't meant to be, and it makes us feel so much better. It makes us feel like there's some sense to life that doesn't always make sense. I love this one. It will all work out. Why? I don't know, because it just will all work out. I mean, and again, if you look at it too close, it gets a little kind of, really? You know, but no, let's just say it will all work out. It makes us comforted. It gives us a little bit to get from here to here. And if we can get from here to here, that's all we can really hope for today, right? The last one. It's always something. My mom used to say this a lot. It's always something. And you know what? It is always something. Just the question of what that something is, right? But it is always something. And all these things, we have these statements, and what they are, are attempts to grasp and somehow touch this thing, this yearning that's in all of us. And it's not just a religious thing. I think every person that has ever lived and will ever live and is currently living on this planet has this desire to feel like there is some sense to my life, that there's some place on my life where I can hang things, that I can connect the dots and say, this is why that happened. This is why this is going on. And without that, we're kind of lost. And I believe it is a God-placed thing in our lives that makes us kind of wrestle and say, there's got to be more than this. Life is going terrible. Things are falling apart. There's got to be something better. There's got to be some sense to this. Or life's going great. Wonderful. Things at work are fantastic. Just got a raise, I got the stuff fixed up at home and holidays and everything's just falling right into place. And even in the midst of that, sometimes you feel like, but what's the purpose? What's the sense behind all this? We want life to make sense. And we ask this question over and over and over again. Why? Why is this happening? Why isn't this working out? Why? Why? When you think about the things, disease, divorce, death, de-employed, because I couldn't think of a D that was unemployed, but then you get the idea. But you think about those things. Nobody goes in, disease, nobody goes in life saying, I'm going to live pretty healthy up to this certain point, and then I'm going to get a dreadful disease. And when we get it, we all ask the question of why, right? And in my job, sometimes I run into people that have been very health conscious their whole life. Our church, part of our belief is the idea of treating our bodies well and watching what we put in and what comes out of it. And there are some people that have been very serious about that. And sometimes people that have been the most serious sometimes come down with ailments that they shouldn't get. I remember sitting at a bedside of a lady who had never smoked, never drank, never, I think she'd been a vegetarian her whole life, had, tried to do everything just right. And she was dying of lung cancer. And you know what her question was? Why? I've done it all right. I've done everything I'm supposed to. Think of a divorce. Nobody goes and says, I fall in love with this person, and we'll get married, we'll kick out some kids, and at some point we're going to fall apart because that's how life works. Nobody does that, right? Or the idea of death. Nobody is ever prepared for death, even when we think we are. Because of that finality to it, that sense of, but what now, and why is this happening? And sometimes it doesn't make sense, and we're going to see it in the story today. Why does sometimes some people die and other people don't die? And that why question, and maybe you've, become de-employed over the last few weeks, or the last year, or the last couple of years. And I can't imagine you joined that job, took that job because you thought, hey, I'm going to be here, I'm going to give my life to it, and at some point, a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, they're going to say, we don't need you anymore. And the question of why is always there. And there's something in us that wants things to make sense. And here's the thing, I wrote this down because I didn't want to forget it. The ingredients in the Christmas story seem so random when you first look at them. You got this decree from Caesar that they're supposed to go and register the census. Got to go back to your home, your papa's hometown, and you got to go all the way back there and put your name down on a thing. There's this engaged couple that things don't go quite the way they planned. There's the angelic announcement, multiple angelic announcements. Angels show up all over the place for this brief period of time, and then we don't seem to hear from them again. There's some wise men that come from this foreign country, aren't even Jewish, aren't even probably believers of God, but they show up. And finally, you have no room at the inn. And the questions of why. So today I want us just to take a little step back. We're going to go over the book of Luke, chapter 1. In just a moment, and just read through part of the Christmas story. But again, while it seems like a random story, Christmas in my mind is the best, is the preeminent, the perfect story to remind us that there is a purpose to life, that things aren't random, that there is a God out there who is working behind the scenes, even when we don't understand it, even when we can't quite figure it all out. There is somebody in charge, somebody in control. Somebody who's trying to put all these pieces together. And the story is, even when those pieces fit together, they don't always make sense. And my hope today as we hear this story again, we'll be reminded that no matter what's going on in our life right now, it does not mean that God has forgotten us. It just maybe means that he is in control, and we just have to grapple with the sense of why and what's going on. So before we go into this happy moment, I invite you to bow your heads and let's pray one more time, all right? Lord, in the moment, I just want to give you some space. Some space in my life. Some space in all of our lives. For you to come and be here with us. To be with us in a way that we can hear from you. That we can sense your presence. And that most importantly, we can make sense out of not just this Christmas story, but sense out of our lives that don't always make sense. But I thank you for the ability to ask why. Because it pushes us places we would not normally go. It makes us grapple with things we don't really want to grapple with. At least I know in my life it's much easier to say, oh, it'll all work out, or there's a reason for everything, or some kind of thing just to get me through. But I know ultimately you want us to put our faith in you and allow you to get us through. So be with us now. As we turn back to this recording of your son's life, be with us now as we turn back to your word in your name. Amen. If you have a Bible, if you want to go over to Luke chapter 1, we're going to start. Now, let me give you a little background. Luke is not one of the disciples. He's not one of Jesus' 12 closest friends. He's a physician, actually, and a little bit of a historian, and he's actually writing this sort of secondhand. He wasn't there, eyewitnesses of all these things, but he begins to describe kind of why he wrote what we call today the book of Luke. He says many, not just a few, but many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us. He says a lot of people have tried to do this. They got these stories. We have some eyewitnesses. We got, Matthew, Mark, John. We got their take. And he says apparently some other people have tried to do it. He says a lot have gone to kind of bring all this stuff together. And just as they were handed down to us from those who were first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. He says a lot of people have gone out to collect this stuff, but I've gone out to do it, and I've talked to the eyewitnesses. I've talked to real people who were actually there. So this is firsthand accounts that I'm spreading over to you. And with this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught. Luke simply says, listen, a lot of people have tried to put this together, but I've had a little time, I have a little bit of training. In fact, he writes the book of Luke in a kind of style of Greek that wasn't the normal kind of person. He was an educated guy. And he puts this piece together. He says, I've carefully researched this. I've gone and talked to eyewitnesses. I've gone and talked to the people that were there. I've heard stories secondhand from others that were around. I've gathered up what this person said, that person said, and I've put it together, and I've decided to write an orderly account, the process of how this worked out, so that you may have certainty. And Luke is saying, listen, I want this to get passed along. When somebody sees it for themselves, it's easy to believe. But when somebody hasn't seen it for themselves, it's important that you have some, not just an orderly account, something that has some meat to it. But more importantly, that you can have certainty of the things you've been taught. And so here's we'll pick up the story a little bit later in verse 26. In the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, and Elizabeth was a relative of Mary, who's the mother of Jesus. In the 6th month of pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee. So God sends this angel to come to this little town, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. Now, for us, this is a little bit foreign. Nobody in this, or I'm guessing not very many, because there are some. The vast majority of us have never been pledged to be married to somebody. But in that culture, you could actually meet your bride or your groom on your wedding day for the very first time. You think about anticipation, right? In weddings we have this wait and everybody stands up and the bride comes in. Sometimes they have a veil and everybody's, and I have to imagine on that day the guy's going like, take the veil off, take the veil, let's be honest, But it's at the moment, here it is, and boom, she's been pledged, this virgin, and she's probably a teenager now. Because that's kind of when everybody got married. And so she's probably between the ages of like 13 and 16, probably somewhere in there, because you don't want to be too old to get married. So this is what it is. And so she's been pledged. And this angel comes to her, and it says the virgin's name was Mary. Now, when Luke writes those words, he has no clue of the impact of that. He has no clue that 2,000 years later, some people would be sitting in Fulton, Maryland, and say, we know exactly who Mary is. We know, you don't have to have a last name for Mary, do we? When we say Mary, we know who Mary is, right? He has no clue that this story will go on to literally change the course of history. That wars will be fought over this, cathedrals will be built, stories will be published, songs will be written. He has no clue. He is simply at this moment saying, I'm giving you an orderly account. I've done all the research, and here is exactly what happened. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I just want you to know that you can be assured of what took place. The virgin's name was Mary. And what may seem random to us is purposeful in the mind of God, because what's going to take place now in the story is totally random. You got this little young girl who's now betrothed to this guy. She's supposed to get married to him, hasn't met him yet probably. Maybe he's had a little bit of meeting, because in the story they have a little discussion. But she's just in this little insignificant town. And all of a sudden this angel pops up. And the angel has also visited her relative over a distance away. But what may seem random to us is purposeful in the mind of God, and it's why we seek purpose in our life. We desire purpose in our life because we want to feel like there's something more, that we have a reason to be here, that there's some kind of connection with something greater and bigger than us. And the story of Christmas is, it was for her, which means it's possible for us as well. The angel went to her and said, greetings, you who are highly favored. We'll come back to that later. Who are highly favored, the Lord is with you. To which Mary says, she says she was greatly troubled at his words and wondered what kind of greeting this might be. She goes, what in the world is going on? Are you the good witch or the bad witch kind of story here? Because she's never seen an angel. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but I'm going to guess the vast majority of us here today have not seen an angel. I don't want you to raise your hand because I don't want everybody to go, ooh, you saw an angel? We'll save that part later, right? But she's never seen an angel. An angel comes and says, you are highly favored. And God is with you. And she goes, I have no idea what to do with this. But the angel says to her, do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. He comes back again. You're highly favored. You have found favor with God. To which she's probably thinking, I'm not sure what that means, but I'm not sure I want to have favor with God at this moment because this is scary. An angel's there talking to her. And the angel says to her, you will. Notice the definite direction of this. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you are to call him Jesus. He will be great, and he will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. His kingdom will never end. To which I imagine Mary thinking, are you pulling my leg? Is somebody pulling a prank on me here? Because, angel, you have to understand. The Romans rule things. Do you not understand that we as a nation have been under enemy rule for like 500 years now? And you're telling me my son is going to have a kingdom that will never end? I mean, angel, you've probably missed the news. I know it doesn't come out very often around here, but you need to read some stuff because this doesn't make any sense. You're telling me, and another question, she says, how will this be? She doesn't just focus on the history part. She says, how will this be? Because, by the way, I'm a virgin. I'm a virgin, and so I can't produce because and I haven't, and I don't want to because, it's crazy, this kind of thing. And the angel answers her and says, listen, and these are some words that it doesn't really help us out. It doesn't describe, because sometimes we say, how does this actually happen? I've had people ask me, she's a virgin, how does God impregnate her? And the answer is, I don't know, and I'm not sure I really want to know, okay? And in fact, the Bible doesn't it just simply says, listen, the Holy Spirit will come on you. And the word come there is this idea of just sort of be around you. And the power of the Most High will overshadow you. That's all we get. God comes around her and overshadows her, and the Holy One to be born of you will be called the Son of God. Remember, Luke writes this 2,000 years ago. All he's doing is saying, these are the facts. This is the story that came. And he probably has talked to Mary. Because remember when Jesus dies, he tells John, his disciple, hey, take care of my mom. And so Luke, as he travels on, probably had a chance to talk to Mary and get the story straight from her. And the idea, this little girl who's never been with a man is not going to have a kid, and not just any kid, but this kid who will be called the Son of God. And here's the cool thing about that. How many of you, I'm going to take a little survey here. How many of you, before you came to church today, before you heard us read that today, how many of you, when you've heard the word, the phrase, Son of God and Jesus linked together, how many of you have heard that before? Son of God and Jesus linked together before? Pretty incredible, isn't it? What Luke said would happen 2,000 years ago is true today. When the majority of people hear the word Son of God, they think of Jesus. Even if they don't believe in Jesus, they say that's the whole story and kind of connection. Even Elizabeth, he says, your relative is going to have a child in her old age. So I don't think it's so strange for you to have a kid, because even your relative, Elizabeth, who's way past birth and children, never had any children, she's going to kick one out here, and she was said to be unable to conceive, and she is in her 6th month. So what you think is impossible, apparently is impossible to God, because she's doing it, and she can do it, you can do it. For no word from God will ever fail, the angel says. No word from God will ever fail. Luke's statement from 2,000 years ago, not linked to how we feel about God's word, not linked to how we've kind of wrestled at times when it seems like he's failed us because he hasn't answered in the way we thought he should. Just a simple statement that no word from God will ever fail. See, this isn't about the plans of man, but it's about the will of God. And the story would unfold. The story unfolds, and now, Mary does get pregnant. And as she's pregnant, some stuff comes up, and she goes along, for this ride. It's 120 miles, by the way, to go from where they were living to Bethlehem to register. And it's got to be great news for somebody who's pregnant, right? You've been pregnant? How you'd like him to have said, hey, honey, we got to go to do the census thing, and take a little while. It's 120 miles away, and got to ride a donkey to get there because it's going to be the best, it's amazing that she waited till she gets there, right, to have the baby. But she goes, and it takes such a long time that when they get there, there's no room in the, right? See, so, it starts off bad, and it goes from bad to worse. Mary's life is, in a sense, just wiped out. Because here she is. And there have to be some times when she's thinking, where'd you go, angel? Because this is the only time we're told that the angel talked to Mary. Angel comes and talks to Joseph a couple times. This is the only time that the angel talks to Mary. And I have to imagine that there were times when she thought like, it would be cool if the angel showed up right now. Because I'm trying to explain to my math teacher why I'm starting to show a little bit, and she doesn't really buy my story, and my mom doesn't buy my story. Joseph's had a real hard time. I think he's there, but I'm not quite sure he's there yet. But the story goes from bad to worse. They go to the census, right? Then they begin to settle down. But just as they're settling down, the angel comes and talks to Joseph and says, you need to get out of town. Because Herod, who's sort of the king, the ruler over that region, has decided he wants to be the only king around. And he's heard stories from these wise men that have come. He's gotten his back up a little bit. He's a little jealous, and he's saying, who do the Jews think they are? Who's this little baby? Finds out about them. So he goes to this area where Jesus was born. And this is the part of the story we don't like to look at, because Christmas for us is this beautiful scene, right? How many of you have a little nativity scene at home? And you got everybody there, right? You got the sheep and the donkey, and you got the little baby in the manger, and you got Mary, and then you got Joseph, and normally you can't tell Joseph from the shepherds because he gets kind of second billing, but you got the shepherds there, right? You got the wise men there, 3 of them. I'm not sure why we have 3, but that's kind of tradition. But they're all there at the same scene. That is not the way the story goes in the Bible. The wise men show up later. They're later. But they get the story, you need to head out of Dodge. But the problem when they head out of Dodge is there are a bunch of little kids 2 years and younger, that the Roman soldiers come in and slaughter. And I have to imagine that the Roman soldiers were a pretty, not only vicious group, but a very thorough group. And so when they come and they say, little boy, okay, and they look at one and they say, we're not sure, little boy, little girl, we don't have time to check, we're just going to, I have to imagine a lot of little girls got killed. I'm guessing pretty much any child 2 years old and younger gets killed by them, gets slaughtered, gets ripped out of their parents' arms and hacked to death. And Mary, I want you to catch this, Mary, for the rest of her life, has to wrestle with the idea that God directed her and Joseph to take Jesus away from that. But he doesn't do anything for all those parents. Why is that fair? She has to carry that with the rest of her life. And she has to come back and raise the family. And at some point, apparently Joseph dies, and so she's now a widower, and she's raising the family. And this goes forward, and this goes forward, 30-some years, and then ultimately she has to see something that no parent should have to see. She has to see her child killed in front of her eyes. And not just killed, but put to death, hung on a cross. And Mary has to figure out her whole life, how do all these parts fit together? Because they're all kind of random. Got some shepherds out in the field one night, watching their sheep, telling their stories, trying to stay awake, and all of a sudden, whoa, angels, and off they go. And it's the only time in their life they've had something special, and apparently that's the thing that keeps them going the rest of their life. Because after that, it sounds like they go back to watching sheep. You got these wise men, you got Elizabeth, you got Joseph, you got all these different people whose lives are dramatically changed and have to ask over and over and over again, why? Why, God? Why is this going on? Why does this keep happening? I mean, the angel said, he's going to have his kingdom that goes forever and ever. And when Mary shares that, everybody has to look at her and say, are you crazy? Because back then, it seemed like whoever was in control was going to be in control for not just a long time. Sometimes when you're in it, it seemed like forever. Everybody thought the Babylonians were going to be in control forever and ever. They weren't, by the way. Persians came along. Persians seemed like they were going to control things forever. 400 years, they controlled the known world at that time. 400 years, twice as long as the United States had been here. And if we were under some rule, like Mary was under some rule at that moment, you would think this is what it is. It's gone on since my parents were here. It's going to go on to my great-grandchildren are here. But the Persians don't last. Alexander shows up, Alexander the Great, and sweeps in and changes things. And it seems like Greece is going to go on for a long time. They don't. Then Rome comes in, and that's when Mary finds out that Rome's been in power, and Rome was a bad group of people to mess around with, right? They are in control, and it seems like they're going to stay in control forever and ever and ever. And Mary carries this weight of, but my little baby is going to grow up, and he's going to have a kingdom that will go forever and ever and ever. See, her life got real complicated real fast. I mean, you ladies in the room today, you imagine if you were 13, 14 years old, if you can imagine that being, going to get married, ready to marry, that's a little out of our ballpark. But just imagine for a moment. And your idea is, you're going to get married, you're going to go live at your husband's family home, and, you're going to kick out some kids, you're going to take care of stuff around the house, the husband will bring home, not the bacon, because Jews didn't believe in bacon, but, they bring home he'll take care of stuff, and your job is simply to kind of try to survive. And all of your kids probably won't survive because most kids don't survive. You probably aren't going to survive for very long. If you're fortunate, you might actually get to see some grandchildren. But a lot of people wouldn't. But that's my job. I'm going to live in this little spot for the rest of my life. No, insignificant, no kind of big thing. But her life gets real complicated real fast because it goes from, this is how it's all going to play out. This is the plan of my life is to, there is no plan any longer. I'm pregnant, out of wedlock, by God. The guy thankfully stays with me, but then we got to run for our life, and we get back, And then I go through this whole thing, and then my son kind of goes off and starts talking crazy. We have to go try to rescue him. He doesn't want anything to do with us. Then I go see him, and I see what he's become, and I'm proud on the one hand, but on the other hand, I know it's not going to end well, and it doesn't end well. And then I'm left to ponder what this all meant, that his kingdom would reign forever and ever. Our story continues to deteriorate. But here's the reality. At the moment when it looked like everything was lost and God had lost control, at those moments, and whether it's at the birth, whether it's a moment when all those little kids are getting killed, whether it's later when he is crucified, at those moments when it seemed like everything is lost and God has lost control, it was actually the moment of God's greatest involvement in the world and its history. And I wonder if the times when our life seem the most screwed up and messed up, when it seems like things aren't fitting, when things aren't quite making sense, I wonder if those moments aren't possibly the time that God is closest to us and most involved in our lives. Not because it all seems to make sense, but simply because there's somebody who has a plan and purpose behind it. Ephesians, this about 25 years later, Paul will write to a group of Christians, and he will sort of summarize it this way. All things, and what does all things mean? Everything, right? All things. All things are done according to God's and how many things? All things are God according to God's and big statement, right? All things. And God chose us to be his own people in union with Christ because of his own what? Purpose, based on what he had decided from the very beginning. See, the order we long for in life, God has provided. But it's an order that we don't have any control over, any real say in, any real power to change. And that's the part that frustrates us, isn't it? Because we want things to work out the way it all works out in our minds. But it doesn't work out that way all the time. He will say to the Galatians, Paul again, when the right time came, when the right time, at the perfect time, at just the right time, God sent his son, born of a woman, to buy freedom for us so that he could adopt us as his very own children. And you may have heard sometime, if you've been around Christian circles or a church very much, you know, God's time is always perfect, right? How many of you have ever heard that before? God's timing is always perfect. And it's, according to this, that's true. The problem with God's time being perfect, it's not our time, right? And that's where the rub happens. It's not a rub with God. God is in control. God's taking care of it. It's us that have the big issue and the problem. And here's something I said last week, but I wanted to bring it back because I thought it was so good that I didn't want you to miss it, all right? To walk by faith, which is the call for all of us as believers in Jesus, to walk by faith is simply taking God at his word and doing what you would do if you believed God would keep his promise. That's what Mary had to do. She had to walk by faith that what this angel had told her was going to turn out. And when first started having the morning sickness and then stuff started to change, I had to imagine at some point she was like, oh no, because it was working out. At that point, she continued to have to walk by faith, doing and taking God at his word and doing what she would have believed God would do if God would keep his promise. In spite of all the stuff in her life that didn't make sense. The death of children, the moving from place to place, the stuff her son said and did, the stories she heard back about the miracles, and to see him on that day, bleeding and battered, and in such pain she just wanted to go out and hold him, and she couldn't. And to watch him breathe his last breath. And here's the amazing thing. Mary shows you that walk of faith in her last statement to the angel. She simply says, I am the Lord's servant. May your word to me be fulfilled. What an amazing faith statement. This little scared girl who's in the presence of an angel. Never seen an angel, will never see an angel again. Who's trying to make sense of these huge, incredible promises. And she takes that walk of faith to believe that God will fulfill his word even if she can't see it. Now, you've maybe heard at point somebody say that mature faith, kind of developed faith, is faith that moves God. And sometimes, as a church organization, we try to get groups of people together, lots of people together to pray. And if we all just prayed, we can move God because our faith will be strong at that moment. I want you to know, at least from my perspective, that's a stupid thing to do. I believe in the power of prayer. But I don't believe God is waiting for just one more person. That'll be the one that sets us over the top, that he says, I'm going to do it now. Wasn't going to do it before, but boy, the numbers got so high that I took the polls and, the stamp, that whole, Democrat, Republican thing, and we got up, we're going to respond to the polls now. And I don't believe God operates that way. In fact, I don't believe mature faith is faith that moves God. I want you to write this down. I believe mature faith is faith that moves God, or moves us to trust God when God doesn't seem to be moving. Because that's a developed faith. And mature doesn't mean a long, it just simply means a deep. And it takes great faith, huge faith, to trust God when God doesn't seem to be moving. And the reality is, you may be sitting here today longing to have that kind of faith. Because you don't see any evidence of God moving in your life. Maybe over the last few months, some relationship has taken a U-turn or gone off the hill, cliff, crashed and burned. Maybe you got one of those wonderful letters just before the holidays here. The letter that says, don't worry about coming back to work after the first year because won't be a job here. Maybe you've got some kind of health announcement that's come along. Some kind of court summons. Come in. It could be God. We want to be respectful, right? Yeah. But I don't know what's going on in your life. But here's the way I want to close today. If you have something in your life right at this moment that does not make sense, and that you long somehow to make sense out of it because you need someplace to hang it so you can just sort of feel like you're going someplace like, or you have some kind of direction. If you got, like I said, it's a job or it's a relationship or it's something that at this moment you have to find someplace to hang it. In a moment, I'm going to invite you to raise your hand. Just to signify, I got that thing. Now, I want you to know, when you raise your hand, there'll be some people that won't raise their hand. That's okay, because probably 6 months ago, they would have raised their hand, or in 3 months from now, they would be able to raise their hand. Because it's kind of how life works, isn't it? At times we get stuff that I just don't know what to do with it. And other times it seems like I got it all kind of in place, at least for this moment. But I want to encourage you to experience mature faith for just a moment. And to trust God when he doesn't seem to be moving, when he doesn't seem to be present, when he doesn't seem to be doing anything about it. And when you feel like you are lost and forgotten, to remember again that there is somebody in control. So if you have one of those things, I just want you to raise your hand for a moment. Keep it up. All right, if you see somebody with a hand raised, I want to invite somebody just close to them. If you would, somebody just reach out and put your hand on their shoulder. That's all I'm going to ask you to do. I'm not going to ask you to pray anything. I just want them to know they're not alone, all right? So put a hand out there. Put a hand on their shoulders here for me. Let's pray together, right? Lord, all of us know what it's like when life doesn't make sense. And we just desire so much that it would. And there's some people who've raised their hands today because life has given them something that doesn't make sense. And if we could fix it, we would have already. But we can't. But at this moment, we're going to make a faith statement that we believe in you and that we're choosing to trust you in spite of no evidence to that effect. We're choosing to trust you based on a 2,000-year-old story that so many parts have proven to be true, that we're going to take you at your word today. And I pray for those that have raised their hands that if you can't help them make sense out of it, that you would at least give them peace in it. And God, I thank you for the assurance that you are in control. And ultimately that control is the right thing to have. So bless us with that now in your name. Amen.